Okay, couple of housekeeping items before we dive into the material. First, at least one of you noticed on the course home page, I have a notice for exam scheduling. Speaking of the exam, what I need to ask you to do is to send me your exam schedule for your other classes that have scheduled exams. You will find the tentative schedule. It's not officially final, but it's pretty close typically. I gave you the link here. It's in the registration material, so please just give me obviously your name, the class, the date, and the time. And what we will do once I get that back from all of you is I will sit down with all of those and figure out a couple of days in which everyone has at least one choice, one availability of the date to have our exam. And fear not, we will go into a ton more detail on the exam when it gets closer in terms of how it works. But to answer Alex's question for everyone, no, we do not use Examplify. It is an open everything except human beings exam. And as I said, you'll get far more detail on that as it approaches. Okay. Just a reminder, since I neglected last time, there is one more screencast, the statutes screencast, and that please watch that for next class because I will be starting class assuming that you have watched it and referring back to it quite a bit. Also, with regard to the last 3 screencasts, I know that it has been a tough start for some of you for this semester. So for those of you who haven't quite seen the first 3 screencasts, I'm extending the due date till next week. There's still a handful of people who haven't watched them. And as I said, in first class, I am recording, and that goes to part of your class participation. Okay, any questions about any of that?
The only way to verify that we were signed in while we watched it is to go to our account and go to lessons and see if it registers as completed.
Yes. Yeah, make sure to sign in to TED-Ed. You should have created an account. It takes about 2 minutes. If you're signed in when you view the screencast, then I can go into my portion of TED-Ed and see that you've actually watched it. Okay, so today we finish up secondary sources. We will also talk about advanced search techniques, looking at advanced techniques as we discuss law reviews or law review articles. Well, articles generally, because we'll also talk about non-legal articles as well. So to get started in looking for articles, there are lots of different ways. I am guessing that most of you already know about Google Scholar. And of course, Google Scholar, you have a couple of choices, articles, case law, and of course the best way to get to Google Scholar is to Google Scholar, just like Google Books. Anybody here use Google Scholar regularly, once in a while? I see heads nodding. Okay. So we're discussing articles. And again, this is a great way to start. It's free, it's easy, we all know Google. So I have put into Google Scholar one of our standard searches for our clients. So we've got denial of coverage, HMO, and I also included in quotes health maintenance organization. Good, I don't know if this is an advanced Google tip or not, but if you want something searched as a phrase, Google may recognize it without you having to do anything, but to make sure, put the quotations around it, and that will ensure that Google recognizes those three words, health maintenance organization, as a phrase. So here are our results. And as you can see on the left here, you can limit it by time. So I have chosen to limit it to 2017. And what I'm going to show you here, so we see here what Google does, since we're here at Hofstra, is it gives us a sense of, you may be able to find these articles at these various places. These links on the side, you can go into your profile and tell Google, I'm at Hofstra, and that's why I get these. It may recognize that automatically. So these links work a lot of the time, but not all the time. I'll talk a little bit about how to find articles when you don't automatically get the link. But my best advice to you is if you're having trouble finding a specific article, come talk to your favorite reference librarian. But one little tip I wanted to give you, just because I think this is really cool. So here's an article, Refining Our Understanding of Value-Based Insurance Design, High Cost Sharing, Children, not really our issue because our client, of course, is not a child. But if we were interested in this, there's no link here. So, of course, we could click on it here in our Google Scholar results. And what you see here, it's unfortunately going to be out of the recording, but you can all see the little lock with the unlock green. This is actually a Chrome extension. It works, I believe, for Chrome and Firefox, but not for Safari. So you may want to switch over to Chrome if you're on your Mac. Unpaywall is the name of the extension. All one word. You go into Chrome and install it, and what it does is it somehow recognizes, hey, this is an article, and it searches for you out there in the free web and says, oh, look, this is actually going to be available for free somewhere. And you click on it, and this extension is free. And if the magic works the way it did this morning, yay, it does, voila, the article. So for all of you working on journals who are source gatherers, you might want to send this along to your fellow source gatherers or to the staff who are working for you as source gatherers. So Unpaywall, a nifty little extension. Is that a question?
I just want to, there's also like additional versions, like under it, if it's not available at one place on Google Scholar.
Additional versions where?
It'll say all 7 or all 6 versions. And so it'll provide a good link if one doesn't work.
Are you talking about
you go back to the search results?
Are you going back to Are we talking about Unpaywall or Google Scholar?
Google Scholar.
Google Scholar. Okay, so back to our search results. And you are looking, versions. Is that what you're?
Yes. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
So, thank you very much. Another great tip. Okay. So that is Unpaywall and finding articles through Google Scholar for free and other versions. Okay, so one other thing we want to think about when we are searching anything really, and I've referred to this a couple of times, is that words matter. As I like to say, and this is very ungrammatical, I grant you, law is words, right? We're not medicine where you get nice pictures of the body systems. We're not accountants with lots of numbers. I mean, you need some numbers in law sometimes. The basis of what we do are words. Case decisions, statutes, regulations, secondary sources, all words. So when you're searching for what the law is, the words you choose still matter very much. We're not yet in an artificial intelligence. I know that's the big tech buzzword these days. We're not yet in a world where computers think and can think for us. So for example, we all think Google's great, right? Or most of us think Google's great. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, fair to say. So here I have our search. Denial of coverage, HMO, Health Maintenance Organization. HMO and Health Maintenance Organization is the same concept. So those are two different words or really phrases that express the identical concept, just a different way in how we use English. If I get rid of one of those ways, so taking a look at those results, first article, differences in 4-year health, second article, predictors, if I get rid of one way of expressing the concept, notice that Google Scholar brings up something totally different. Now you'll find, I shouldn't say totally different, there are differences in our results. So the words, even as great and smart, quote unquote, as Google is, the words we choose are going to matter a lot. And so part of your job in terms of doing research are choosing the words to best express your ideas. And to reinforce this point, and because I think it's kind of fun, I don't know if any of you watched Bugs Bunny when you were kids, but I'm still a fan. So bear with me. Hopefully the technology will work. Actually, I have to, not necessarily that we're using to research, but they do matter. So for example, we want to think about words that express the same idea. So we were just talking about HMO and Health Maintenance Organization. Another example that you may run across in the legal world is the word fire. That's actually not two words. That's one word that means two different things. There's the hot stuff in the fireplace that could burn a house down, and then there's terminating employment. My favorite example of two words that mean the same thing is cat and feline. Maybe not so legal, but you get the idea. So you need to think about what words, are there multiple words to express the same idea, like HMO and Health Maintenance Organization? Can a word be confusing and express two different ideas, like the word fire? Okay, so as we think about words, let's dive into the various resources to look at how to structure those words in order to express our ideas. So we will start in Westlaw and look at the different resources in the context of, as I said, law review articles. So again, good practice if you're looking for secondary sources to start out and tell Lexis, Westlaw, or Bloomberg. Let's start in secondary sources. And as you will note, we can limit if we choose to different types. I had put together the third screencast on restatements. That's pretty much most of what we will do with regard to restatements. Not because restatements aren't really useful and important resources, but because I think they're fairly straightforward, and what I presented you pretty much should give you what you need to know about them. There were a couple of really excellent questions in the screencast, so I will address those. So there are actually a couple of people who wanted to know how to find out when states adopt restatements. Now, I think what's happening, but I'm not entirely sure, is that some of you are getting model laws confused with restatements and principles of law. So the restatements, what we would search here, and what I was talking about in the screencast, talked about the group, American Law Institute, gets all these experts together and figures out what is the basics of the law of contracts, torts, property, all the areas of the restatements. A model law is a group, sometimes it's the same group, American Law Institute, or it's the Uniform Laws Commission, sit down and figure out what would be a great model law for each of the states to pass so we have some uniformity. So there's the model penal code you probably spent a lot of time talking about in crim law. There's the Uniform Commercial Code that you may be talking about if you're taking some kind of commercial transactions course, securities, etc. We will talk about those model and uniform laws later on in the semester when we talk about state laws, and then I will show you how you can tell what states adopt what model laws. But again, the restatements are secondary sources. They're very well respected secondary sources. So to answer another question, yes, you could cite them in a memo or a brief, but you would cite them as persuasive authority because they are just, again, a group of experts saying, here is what we think the basic statement of the law is. But they are not primary authority. And the other couple of questions, yes, absolutely, you could start your research in a restatement if you felt the restatement was giving you something useful. That's one of the reasons I suggest you start searching secondary sources generally rather than narrowing down to a particular type, because you don't know what you're going to get that's useful. Maybe there's a restatement in there that's great, and it's a great place to start. And I will show you how to get to restatements on Bloomberg, although I honestly don't think Bloomberg's the best place to go for that. Any questions on restatements? If you feel I haven't answered your questions or covered it, please chime in now or ask questions whenever, however you would like to. Okay. So let's, as I said, good place to start here in secondary sources generally. make sure I'm not putting HMO. And once putting in, and this is our very basic search, and I'm throwing that in again just so you don't have to watch me struggle with typing up here. And at this point, again, as a strategy for searching secondary sources, I would scan through and take a look, what's useful that might help explain our issue with our client. Notice also I haven't limited by jurisdiction. We talked about the problems, not really problems, but the disadvantages of that, because you might miss out on something like this AMJUR proof of facts, which we looked at last time, and that looked pretty useful. At this point, depending on what I find, I might try limiting to a couple of different types, because, I mean, 10,000, obviously, that's too many to go through. So I might say, hey, I know ALR can be really useful if I find one that's right on point, like we did last time. So I might narrow it to ALR just to see if I find one useful. Then I might cancel my limits and look at American jurisprudence. I might do the same and look at law reviews, just so I don't have quite so much to look at. So I'm not drinking from the giant garden hose, and I'm drinking from a nice small glass instead. Okay, so a little bit on strategy. So some of those advanced techniques I keep on promising, one of which actually one of the groups last time already knew about, and that's search within results. So we discovered in looking at that ALR article in some of the other resources we found that we have this whole ERISA preemption thing we have to figure out. Does it apply to us? So I might do my general search, and then I might want to search within. The advantage, among the many advantages to search within, is that if you are in an environment where you get charged per search, then a search within is not an additional charge. Now, again, you want to find out what that contract is. So there's another question in the screencast about should you never start in secondary sources. I would argue, unless you already know a lot about your issue, you should just about always start in secondary sources, but just be very aware where you're working, what your contract covers. So you want to be careful and not run up a huge bill. And this is one way to avoid that. So I am plugging in the word preempt !/s ERISA. Anybody know what that exclamation is for? All variations of preempt. Preempt, preemption, preempting. As you've already seen, I'm a crummy typist, but this way I can tell Westlaw, don't make me type, just get all the versions. So it's called truncations because I'm truncating it at the common part of the word. So if I wanted to truncate the word liable, so I get liable, liability, where would you think I should put the exclamation after what letter? This will work. I love the handwriting, that's why I don't write on the board. After the B. Exactly, because if we had the word liable, and if I wanted to give you a trick question, I try to avoid trick questions, by the way. If I wanted to give you a trick question, I would have asked you the word liable, and some folks might have said there, but then you wouldn't get liability because there's no E in liability. I bet you didn't know that practicing law, you needed to know spelling in this day and age of spell check. Okay, so that's truncation. What on earth is /S ERISA? Within the same sentence. So what I have done, and someone asked this in one of the screencasts, is I have sent, or did I send it around to you? Did everybody get a handout? Sorry, I'm stealing yours. So I sent around, there should be an extra pile somewhere. Oh, there it is. Excellent. So here are, they're called legal search operators, and here are just about every one that you could want to use. I would say the 4 that you'll use the most are and, or, /S/P, all right, 5 quotations, and of course the truncation symbol, so 6. So and, so when you want both parts of the word, so you can see here Westlaw gives us an example, civil and liability, so you get both words. Or for when you have two terms that express the same concept, like HMO or health maintenance organization, /S within the same sentence, /P within the same paragraph. Okay. Now, why do you need this in this day and age of natural language? Well, it's going to help you put those all-important words together to better express your idea, and possibly more convincingly, if not more importantly, and if you want to use search within, you have to use the connectors. Search within does not understand natural language. So I cannot put in preempt ERISA and expect search within to get all of the different forms of preemption and to search it within the same sentence or paragraph or whatever. So continue, and I always have to remember to apply my filters. And so here you see the various results. Okay, another advanced technique. So let's go back to the home page. And you'll notice up here next to our search bar is the word advanced. Most databases have some advanced function, and Lexis and Westlaw are no exception. So if I click on advanced at the home page, I basically get this search template, and it allows me to search specific fields within the document. Now, a field is just a part of a document. But because I'm searching all of Westlaw, there are lots of different types of documents. So there are cases and then statutes and secondary sources and dockets and all sorts of stuff. So it can't list every single field and every single type of document. So it gives me only a couple of really basic ones. This home page is actually not where I recommend that you go to the advanced search. Where I recommend you go to the advanced search is once you have narrowed. And I would say narrowed by some form of document type. So secondary sources is a good example. Now, once we're in secondary sources, if I go to advanced, what you will see is I get the option for a lot more fields that I can specify. So I would say for secondary sources, and especially for law reviews, there are a couple of fields that are going to tell me what the document is about. And if you don't know what these fields mean, by the way, Westlaw gives you this nice option to click on that image, and Westlaw tells you, oh, look, the preliminary field is this stuff on top. Here are the references, and if you scroll down text, obviously the title. And yes, we want to resume. So as I started to say, in secondary sources, especially for law reviews, right, the title is going to tell us what the article is about. You know, sometimes the titles are, you know, sort of cutesy, but usually they get to the point within the title to tell you what it is about. So if okay, let me rephrase that. How many of you have searched on Lexis or Westlaw for law review articles for secondary sources and just gotten a whole lot of stuff that uses your terms, but not anything to do with what you want? Okay, so half of you at least. So here is one way to get around that problem, is to go into secondary sources, go into advanced, and then type in your search terms. So I'm going to type in a slightly more advanced search so we can get to know some of these connectors a little bit better. So again, as we already determined, liab exclamation, so we get liable and liability, and then a space and then /p, so I get within the same paragraph, so just to broaden it a little bit. And then I want to get, because I know that HMO and health maintenance organization are the same thing, but could be used interchangeably, but one might be used and the other not. I want to tell Westlaw, okay, I want you to get any form of the word liability, and I want that to be in the same paragraph as either HMO or health maintenance organization. So I want to group those two terms that mean the same thing, synonyms, if you remember way back from 6th grade English. So I have the parenthesis around the terms that I want to group as a bunch. Now, a lot of people get hung up, oh God, where do I put in this parentheses? I don't understand it. Don't stress about it. The great thing about Boolean searching is if you put in the parentheses and you didn't really need it, it doesn't matter. So just think to yourself, do I want these terms searched as a bunch? So yes, I want, actually, I think I made a big mistake. I want HMO or Health Maintenance Organization. So good to make mistakes now and again because it gives me a chance to explain, because I want either, they both mean the same thing, right? So I want Westlaw to find it if HMO is in the title or if Health Maintenance Organization is in the title. So I want to use the connector or, but I want them as a group because I want either one of them within the same paragraph as liable. And so what's happening here is Westlaw is putting it up in my search bar automatically for me, and all I need to do is search. Any questions? So as we scan down, we start to see some of the familiar results, some not so relevant because we're not interested in physician liability, but we are interested in health maintenance organizations. And at this point, if we wanted to see how this applies to law reviews, we can limit further and apply those filters. To see what law reviews come up. So a couple of features on Westlaw to know about, especially with regard when searching law reviews, is that we can sort by different ways. So this is relevant, so this is how Westlaw determines what's relevant. But we know that being current is important, so maybe we want to sort by date. That sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. I find sometimes it's really great, like in this instance, it's surfacing an article that looks pretty good. Sometimes I find it surfaces stuff that are totally irrelevant. Doesn't cost anything, worth a minute's worth of work to try. Another feature that Westlaw has that can be really useful is most cited. So which law reviews have been cited most by other articles? Might give you a sense of how influential it is, right? Okay. So we see our results here. Now, one thing, a lot of people are tempted to limit by state when using law reviews. And I want to caution against that because you think about it, our wonderful Hofstra journals, you might publish an article that's not just about New York law, right? It might be about all over the country. There's actually an article in here that we don't see now, but it's in there. It's actually from the Quinnipiac Health Law Journal that talks about New York law. Quinnipiac's in Connecticut. If we had limited to New York, we wouldn't get that Quinnipiac article. So, again, you want to find New York law because our client is in New York, but limiting it to New York at this stage might cause you to miss useful resources. You might want to still look in New York resources like New York jurisprudence, right? Because that's an encyclopedia of New York law. As I told you last time, that's where I send attorneys a lot of the time if they're looking specifically for New York law. But again, you risk not finding things that might be useful. Just a second here. So I'm going to add another term up here, which I neglected to do earlier. As you might remember, we also discovered that managed care was a term used, and HMOs were one type of managed care. So we could use that also as an alternative. So use HMO or health maintenance organization or managed care.
Next question.
Sure.
Let's say that just happened to you, and you're in practice where you're paying for your search. Would you then search within results instead of going back to the top bar? Because as I just pressed orange, now I'm another $50. Like when would you say, all right, it's different enough, and whatever, I need to be in an entirely new search, or when would I go only within results?
So again, be aware of your plans. So if you are paying by transaction, then yes, worry about it. So if you do have to worry about it, then yes, search within results is a great option. I would use search within results so as to avoid paying wherever possible. So I think to myself, all right, I forgot to put in managed care. I could, if I search within results, would that give me what I need?
Right, so the problem is where at managed care, I'm only getting managed care within HMO or health maintenance organization, et cetera, where if I get it in the bigger search bar, then I can also get articles that only refer to whatever this entity is as managed care.
Right.
I guess that's just a value difference.
So I would determine, yeah, I've now eliminated all documents that use managed care but not HMO or health maintenance. So yes, I would need to rerun that search, and I would have to decide whether it's worth the cost. So as I mentioned, that's why that Quinnipiac journal I mentioned to you earlier, that's why it didn't come up, because I left out managed care. So you see that it would have come up. So there's an example where I would have missed a good article from Quinnipiac about New York law. I think a lot of plans, what Westlaw and Lexis have tried to get away from is charging you for searches. Now, it still happens with the transactional, but a lot of the plans now focus on charging you when you actually go into a document. So I can't promise you won't have that problem, and yes, I would have incurred more costs, my bad. But that's how you get around it. Okay, so the other reason I wanted to change the search, because if we go to most cited, I wanted to show you one other advanced technique for finding relevant articles. And this is, again, especially true for law review articles. So I've sorted by most cited. So here is on the very top, the most cited in my search results, managed care organizations and patient injury, rethinking liability. That sounds pretty good, right? It's really old, 1997. So I might want to take a look at it. We don't know exactly if and when the law changed. But really what I want to do when I find a really good article that I'm worried is out of date, if I go to that article, and yes, I am incurring a document view charge, unfortunately, but then I can go to citing references. So these are those law review articles and other types of documents, cases, appellate court documents, that cite to what looks like a really great article. And because it cites to that article, it means it's newer than that article. So I will get newer results. And I can limit to law reviews if I want, but I'll probably just leave it secondary. And I can see that there are going to be some certainly more recent, but some really useful ones, some maybe not so much. I can actually sort this internally by date to really surface the most recent if I want to. So we can see this 2017 Dobbs Law of Torts. I never would have thought to look in there. Managed care organization. So maybe that's useful. Okay, any questions about Westlaw? So let's take a look at Lexis, and not that there's any one is necessarily better than the other, but it pretty much works the same. So again, here in secondary materials, and this is where I would find a link to restatements. If I wanted to search just restatements, as you can see there. And again, following my strategy, again, we have search within results, and all of the same caveats apply. We do need to use connectors, the Boolean connector / P and or exclamation. Note we have the sorting capability here, although we don't see date, unfortunately, there. The same strategy for advanced searching applies. So if I go back here to the Lexis home page, I don't really want to click on advanced here, although on Lexis you can. I want to go into secondary materials, and then I can go to advanced. What Lexis will do actually is Lexis will pull up this list down here, so you could actually get to the secondary materials template down there also. But here we have secondary, advanced search secondary materials. What I might even want to do down here is go more specifically to law reviews, because that will give me even more options. But I would at least go to secondary, so that way you could search the title. And I have one typo there we'll get rid of. And as I said, it works pretty much the same. Lexis populates it up here. So I must have done something bad here to get no results. It's not my day for typing. So when all else fails, start over. So liability / P HMO or or managed care. And search. There we go. Don't know what I did wrong, but again, yes, I would get charged for a transaction if you make a typo. So good to proofread. So we are already narrowed to law reviews, and as I mentioned, you can do the same sorting. And within law reviews, I can actually go to newest down to oldest. And if I do, same strategy on Lexis, if I do find an older article that looks relevant, instead of citing references on Lexis, I can actually shepherdize a law review article. And the reason I want to shepherdize a law review article is to see where else it has been cited. Now it says no documents. That's in decision. So this article hasn't been cited in cases, but it has been cited in other sources, which include lots of secondary sources, which obviously also include law reviews. In fact, I can narrow to law reviews if I choose. Lexis doesn't have the ability to sort by date, but you can kind of do that with the timeline and just drag this over and say, Lexis, just cover between 2011 and 2016 if you really want to. Okay, any questions? So going here to Bloomberg, as I said, Bloomberg is probably my least favorite, especially for law reviews. And Bloomberg also does not yet have a search within function. So for law reviews, I find the best way is to go to this select sources. And the main thing I'm going to show you, actually, I should note, you'll find restatements, just because somebody asked, you'll find restatements here in books and treatises. You can always type your source in the search bar as well. But let's go to law reviews because that's what we're looking at. And the reason I don't like Bloomberg for law reviews as much is that they don't have nearly as many. So for instance, shame on Bloomberg, there are no Hofstra journals in here. I don't know why that is, but you see I scrolled right past H with no Hofstra in there. So that's definitely a reason to have an attitude regarding law reviews on Bloomberg, I think.
They have Harvard.
I know.
Right?
Who can fathom why? Okay. The one good thing about Bloomberg, however, is we're chatting about transaction fees. Bloomberg is a flat fee. Once your organization is paid for Bloomberg, you don't have to worry about any of that. You can make as many mistakes and typos as you want, and you don't have to worry about paying extra. So that is a good thing, even if they don't have Hofstra. But I don't think it makes up for it. Okay, so another way to solve that problem when you're searching Lexis and Westlaw and you're getting way too many results that are way irrelevant is to look at an index. Now, an index is going to be different than full text searching because an index only searches the basic information, or what we librarians like to call bibliographic information about the article. So by bibliographic information, I mean title, author, and subject headings, basically. You could also search by citation, but if you already know the article, then you don't have to worry about term searching. So here we have Hein Online. Everybody familiar with Hein Online? You all know how to get here? If you don't, just wave. You don't have to. No? Okay, that's totally fine. That's why I ask. So here in the Law Library homepage, if you Google Hofstra Law Library, you'll get here. And you will scroll down a little, you will see Hein Online. And what it will do, as it's doing now, is it will ask you to authenticate to make sure you are a legitimate Hofstra user. So you type in your network credentials, so your H number, and then your password. So it's a good thing, thank you, I would have had to do this anyway. And let's get rid of all the silly password prompts. And so voila, Hein Online. So many of you are familiar with Hein Online because it's a great place to get PDFs. That's what Hein Online does. So that means if you have an article with charts or graphs or numbers, this is going to be a much better place than Lexis or Westlaw, because Lexis or Westlaw usually just doesn't show you the charts, graphs. Sometimes it'll show you numbers, but not tables. Hein Online has, the other thing Hein Online does is it goes back to the very beginning. Lexis and Westlaw only go back to sometime in the 1990s maybe. So if you have a really old article, you won't find it on Lexis or Westlaw. You will on Hein Online. So we have the Law Journal Library that those of you who use Hein Online are probably most familiar with. So a couple of features in the Law Journal Library. The other thing about Hein Online, if you are working somewhere that actually does subscribe, is it's again flat fee. So not a bad place to look for law reviews, especially if you're paying a lot of money on Lexis and Westlaw for law reviews. You don't want to go there first. Hein Online. Actually, I'd probably go to Google Scholar first myself, but then Hein Online, because it's essentially the same thing. Because once you're paying for Hein Online, again, it's flat fee. So I might go to the Law Journal Library, and I might try the advanced search. And then the searching is not nearly as sophisticated as Lexis or Westlaw. I might want to go to help to learn what search connectors I can and can't use, because Lexis and Westlaw are the most sophisticated with /s and /p and all those other lists I gave you on that handout, but that's not true pretty much anywhere else. So Google isn't sophisticated with those search connectors, Hein Online isn't, and the way you find that out is in help. So I would find that out and type in my text. Another thing I might do if I do have a citation is, again, I wouldn't, is to go here to the citation tab, because there's this nice citation navigator And if I do have an actual citation, this is actually the easy way to get to an article. So that's Hein Online. Any questions? Okay, we're going to take an early break. So if you could come back at 5 after, we will continue with talking about finding law reviews. So as I started to say before and got a little ahead of myself, at least half of us have run into the issue where we're doing a search for law review articles and on Lexis Westlaw, and we're getting back results with our terms, but totally irrelevant. So another source to help us get around that problem is an index. As I started to describe, an index has the bibliographic information. The best index for legal articles is not surprisingly called Index to Legal Periodicals. And we get to the Index to Legal Periodicals from the library homepage. And again, this nice blue box that lets us search for online resources. Type in Index to Legal Periodicals. And yeah, you do have to remember that name in order to find it this way. And again, when you use that resource, searching for online resources, make sure to click under the heading link and not the title, just because that's how the database is designed. And you get to this database called Index to Legal Periodicals. You put on the platform called EBSCO, just so you understand what all the names are. I wouldn't waste too much time worrying about it. So here, like we saw in the catalog, you get this multi-box function. So if I wanted to search for our issue, I might put in HMO and then LIAB, and then I'm going to put a star. Why am I putting a star and not an exclamation point? Any guesses? Okay, fair enough. As I said, I don't really do trick questions, so I was just asking for guesses. I do a star because, as I said earlier, every database has different connectors, truncation, and when you look at a new database, it's a good idea, especially if you want to use those connectors or truncation, to go to the help. It's kind of off of our recording here, but you can see at least the H, and you can see it on the screen. So you might want to don't just assume, oh, it's got to be an exclamation, because actually in most non-legal databases, in my experience, it's more likely to be the star, but not always. So, and this is a legal database. So I should say most non-Lexis or Westlaw data or Bloomberg databases. So in looking under searching, I could discover the help entry for wildcard and truncation symbols. And then if we looked in that, we would discover that the star is the truncation symbol rather than the exclamation. So let's go ahead and search so we see what the results look like. So again, we get a listing of articles. Again, this index is not searching full text. It's searching that bibliographic information I told you about. So you see the hits in the title. It's also searching these subjects. So these subjects are actually a great way to help us refine our searching. And these subjects are actually one reason why the index is a good place to look when Lexis and Westlaw full text searching isn't working for us, or Google Scholar for that matter. So we can see, once we've done a search, we can go into an article, or we can go on the side here and look at all the different subjects that have been assigned to the articles that we've retrieved. And then I can narrow by those subjects. So malpractice liability in the healthcare industry, that sounds promising, so I'm going to check that off. So now I've limited to the 53 articles with that subject. I might want to limit or really add to that, not limit. We've been talking about fiduciary responsibility. Maybe I want to see what articles talk about fiduciary or federal preemption. I could do both. So as you can see, it goes from 53, so I narrow further. So now I'm getting articles with both the subject, malpractice liability in the healthcare industry, and the subject, federal preemption. I could cancel out of either of those subjects and add on fiduciary if I want. Another way to discover good subjects and to use them is to actually find a relevant article. Now this one's only going to have those two because we've limited it, but you could also find relevant subject headings by looking at an article. And again, it depends on what your search results are for your particular issue. Okay, so I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail. I'm going to cancel out on finding articles. As I said, you could use that unpaywall extension on Chrome or Firefox. As you can see, a lot of these articles are in PDF. I would say, so you can actually get the full text. Result, you're not going to search the full text. Here, for instance, it's only in HTML, but it's still full text. If I couldn't find the article, either that I got a reference from in Index Legal Periodicals or Google Scholar or wherever else I was searching, I would basically, the first thing I would do is copy and paste the article title and Google it, which is probably the first thing you all would do. I might also try that in Lexis and Westlaw. So I wouldn't get too deterred if I saw a result here in Indexed Legal Periodicals or Google Scholar, and sounds like a great title, but I didn't have full text. I would just try to find it elsewhere. Okay, so are there any questions about indexes, or at least the indexed legal periodicals? We'll actually look at some other non-legal resources in a little while. All right. So as promised, let's take a look at law review articles and Boolean searching online. I'm going to pass around workshop. In the law, for instance, for our client, we had a lot of discussion about the facts of her case. So, for instance, exactly what did she do with regard to the insurance company? What kind of response did she get? Did she get a denial of coverage in writing? We were wondering exactly how did the insurance company come to this decision? How does that decision making in HMOs, or managed care as we now know, how does that work? Because if we know how it works, then maybe we can figure out if the particular person who made the decision did so negligently or did not follow the industry standard. So this background non-legal information could be useful for our client. So hopefully, having convinced you that this might be useful at some point, how do we get there? Well, again, there's always Google. Always Google Scholar. Google Scholar obviously is not limited to just law review articles. But moving beyond Google Scholar, at least here at Hofstra, and again, as graduates, you are all welcome to come back to Hofstra anytime, in which case you would have access to what we're going to look at. Main difference being you would not have access remotely once you graduate, and that's because of our licensing. So we are contractually obligated to not have non-Hofstra or even graduates of Hofstra. So what would you look at either as a graduate or currently now? We would take a look and see what the Axon Library has to offer. Axon, of course, is the main university library. If you haven't been there, go there before you graduate. It's a really neat place. How do I get to their resources? Again, here off the library homepage, there's no real obvious link, so you kind of just have to know this. I have a tendency to go to topic list just because I find a lot of useful stuff there. If you have another way, if you just want to Google Axon Library, that works too. Because once I do that, once I go to topic list, I know the link is here. And what you see is something called OneSearch. What Axon has done is it's taken all of its databases and basically, in a way, kind of dumped it into a large, gigantic database so you could search it with one search. Get it? So we could type in, we want to find out how does managed, because we want the more general term, managed care plan administration work. So managed care plan administration. And I search this gigantic dump database of all the different databases, and all these different databases also include the catalog, because that, of course, is a database. And we just see a random mix of all sorts of stuff. Medicaid managed care, lots of Medicaid managed care, lots of Medicaid managed care, minding P&Q's political policy questions. That kind of makes sense, policy. So what I tend to find personally, a lot of students love OneSearch because it's kind of like Google, it's nice and easy, and there's nothing wrong if it works. But I kind of find it's like way too much stuff all over the map. And again, I just get a whole lot of stuff with my terms that isn't really answering my question. So as I tend to like to do, I like to go to the advanced search. And maybe play around with my terms as well. So maybe we'll stick with managed care because, again, that's the general term for the type of insurance HMO is. And we had our real issue comes down to it being a coverage denial, right? So try that in the different boxes. Okay, so we're getting closer, I think. I mean, no, unfortunately, we're not in California, so that's probably not going to be the greatest article. I might take a look at it again because we're now looking at Axon databases. We don't have to worry about transaction charges or any of that. So it might be worth looking at quickly. I wouldn't spend a lot of time. And the other thing to point out to you about this OneSearch is you will occasionally not. You can try this find article. It may get you there, it may not. These linkages, we're at the point with the technologies, sometimes these linkages work really well. And it's like, ooh, that's magic. And sometimes it doesn't work at all and it's frustrating. At which point I would then copy and paste and try to find it a couple of different ways, which we'll talk about momentarily. You will sometimes find PDFs, so obviously that's a good thing too. So how would I find a particular article that doesn't have a PDF, and if I've clicked on the link and it doesn't work? Well, again, copy and paste and go into Google Scholar. If I have that unpaywall extension, that might help me. So we all know that. That's pretty easy, I think. Another way I would go is another resource that the folks at Axon Library provide for us, and that is Journal Finder. And again, you can get to Journal Finder a whole bunch of ways. I tend to go from the library homepage, the law library homepage, not surprisingly, because that's what I'm used to. And what I would do is I would take the name of the journal. So, Journal of Legal Empirical Studies. I think I might have done that in one of these. So here's Journal of Legal Empirical Studies. So here's the search results. So here in Journal Finder, Journal of Legal Empirical. See, this is why I don't type. So again, I'm taking the name of a Journal Finder. You take the name of the journal, not the article. Google, you would do the article. And what Journal Finder does is it tells me where in Hofstra's database subscriptions I might find the Journal of Legal Empirical Studies, and I can try and find the article that way since I already have the citation from my OneSearch results. Another tool here at Hofstra is actually Journal Finder with search options. So up here up top, and this is kind of cool. It's a new feature of Journal Finder. So I could actually do a keyword search. So I might try HMO liability. And Journal of Legal Medicine. So I will get some overlap because Hein Online is indexed through Journal Finder, but I will also get some other non-legal results. So that is non-legal research here at Hofstra. It's an introduction. Obviously, there's a lot more that could be said and done, but that should get you started. Any questions? So another tool for legal and non-legal research, but probably more often more useful for non-legal research, is your public library. How many of you have a library card to your public library? Ooh, cool! I am impressed. Because depending on where you are, I don't know if you live in Queens, Nassau, Manhattan, Brooklyn, obviously it's going to be different. So I, for instance, as I mentioned in the first class, live in Long Beach. And I have my Long Beach card just for show and tell, don't ask me why. So going back here, again, I just Googled Long Beach Public Library, New York. You have to say New York because otherwise it pulls up California, which is annoying, but anyway. And there is research. Now, obviously, each of your public libraries that you have a card to are going to look different, but you'll get there and you'll have some kind of research link, is my guess. So let's go search database by subject. And so for our client, we might go with health and medicine. I wouldn't go law because we have far more sophisticated law databases here. So I might try General One File, Health and Wellness Resource Center, and I can search it. I can go to library or at home, and at that point I would plug in my library card number. I'm not going to bore you with my struggling with typing in my library card number, but if you all have a library card, if you live in Nassau County, I believe that's how it will work for you as well. It may look a little, well, the page will look a little different. Queens may also look a little bit different, but how many of you knew that you had access to research databases from your library card? So you have learned something, hopefully more than just this one something new today, but this is obviously really useful for a lot of things. For example, again, those of you who work for journals, if you are source gathering or directing or supervising source gatherers, sometimes you will find newspaper articles this way. I found a Washington Post article that we actually didn't have access to here at Hofstra, but I went to my Long Beach site and I was able to get it. Actually, no, I stand corrected. I didn't go to my Long Beach site. I went to the New York Public Library site because, even though, yes, it is in Manhattan, but as New York residents, you are entitled to become members of the New York Public Library and get, yes, another show and tell, a New York Public Library card. And yeah, you actually have to get the card, and you do have to go there, which is a little bit of a hassle if you live here on the island, because you do need that number on the back. But you all are entitled to this, which entitles you to research databases at the New York Public Library. And this is actually where I found the Washington Post article that we did not have access to here at Hofstra. There are a lot of other research databases. There are also ebooks, if any of you like to read ebooks. So lots of other good stuff at the New York Public Library. So questions about your favorite public library? And yes, if you have a couple of things, actually, Marianne brought up a good question. You need help doing non-legal research? Call a local university library, even if you didn't go there. We get phone calls all the time, and we'll try to help people as much as we can over the phone. That's what we librarians do. So definitely give your public library a call, a local university library a call, or your favorite Hofstra library a call. Also, as I said, Marianne brought up, she had a question on, she did a search on Lexis, and the first result, how many pages of results, pages and pages of results from a UK journal, which wasn't what she's looking for because she wants US law, and she was wondering how to eliminate that journal and didn't really find a great answer for her. So what I am going to do is contact our account rep for Lexis, because it was on Lexis. And the point of this story is that Lexis and Westlaw have chat help. You could go online for chat. They also have 1-800 numbers you could call pretty pretty much 24/7. Sometimes they're not there at 3 in the morning, but yeah, hopefully you can understand that. The point being, that is another research resource. Call for help. Lexis and Westlaw, and they do not charge for that. So good to know. I know a lot, especially new attorneys, who are a little unsure about the search construction and worried about costs, which is a good thing. So they call the reference attorneys at Westlaw, or I forget what they're called at Lexis, but they call the 1-800 numbers, and they get help with their search construction from the experts at Lexis and Westlaw. So I did not want to forget that. Okay. Any questions about non-legal research? So we have now come to the end of our first unit on secondary sources. So what are some of the themes that you all remember? Yeah, that's
It's a good place to start your research.
yay, a good place to start your research, especially when you don't know much. Okay, what else?
Use connectors.
Use connectors can be really useful. You don't always have to, but absolutely. Yeah.
Use the time bar to get rid of a lot of the older stuff.
If you want to see the recent stuff, yeah, but remember my story about the 1880s case that wound up being relevant? Sometimes the old stuff is still good. Don't discard us old stuff, you young people. But yeah, if you want to you do want to see what's recent, because that is important. Yeah.
Encyclopedias as initial surface level resource, and treatise as a more in-depth specific resource.
Yeah, so encyclopedia is going to be much broader. Treatise is much more in-depth. A couple of people asked on the screencast question, do I always start in treatises or do I always start in encyclopedias? And the answer is classic law school, it depends. That's why I suggest go to the secondary on Lexis and Westlaw and don't limit further, because you don't really know which one's going to be better. The answer is where to start is where you find useful information, which I know is kind of circular, but that really is the best way to go. But yeah, if you know you want a more surface, then try the encyclopedias. Narrow down to AMTR and see if it's useful. Take a look at ALR, which is a little more in-depth, and see if you find something useful. What else? Yeah, Alicia. Yeah, I haven't really talked very much in depth about the difference between secondary and primary. You all kind of remember it from first year, but yeah, those secondary sources refer us to that all-important primary source, the law, which we'll talk about next time. What else? What about tables of contents? Especially secondary sources, although when we talk about stat sheets too, any resource organized by subject, the table of contents is really super useful. You haven't mentioned, and I have been remiss in not emphasizing this enough, and in fact this gives me the opportunity. We talked about up-to-date material, and one of you in the screencast very astutely asked about updating books, which we're going to go down and do a treatise exercise soon. So you'll need to know. So here's a treatise on contracts, Farnsworth. And Farnsworth is updated by this pamphlet. Now I'm showing you this now, and you're thinking, yeah, big deal. Maybe. You're thinking that. You have to know to look for this extra update on the shelf. Why? Because when I looked in the back, there's nothing. What am I looking for in the back? A pocket part. Unique, I think, to legal publication. A pocket part known as such because there's a pocket in the back. And there's this pamphlet-y thing, I guess it's a part, that goes in the back. So Farnsworth did not have a pocket part, but this one, UCC, White and Summers, does have a pocket part. So whatever you are online and going to the iLink or the publication info, or you are in print and you need to look for the supplement or pocket card, you must update, update, and update. Law is changing all the time. It is so important that I'm going to get even crazier and insist, update, update, and update. And hopefully by the end of the semester, when you hear the word update, you will bang the table reflexively. That is my goal. Okay. So when we go down to do the treatises exercise in a little while, you will update, update, and update your print treatise, as you will do online by clicking on the I link or finding the publication info. Anything else about secondary sources? Okay. So before we go down for the treatises exercise, I'm going to distribute assignment 1 and go over it a little more in depth since this is the first assignment. Assignment 1 will also appear on the TWEN site starting at 7 o'clock because that's when I timed it to show up. So right now you probably shouldn't unless Westlaw got the time wrong, but that's okay. And what I will ask you to do, it will be in Word format. I will ask you to download that and put in your answers in that Word document. And you will want to make sure to put your name on top of that Word document. And then email that to me at my address. All of those instructions are in the top box of the assignment that's going around. And you will see this exact document on TWEN, as I said, as of 7 o'clock. Other instructions on the top box is you may work together. Groups of 2, 4, 8, 12, 18, if you want to coordinate, that's fine. But your searches should be different and your evaluation answers should be different. So by searches, when you do a search, whatever, if you are searching for, one of you searches liability HMO, and you're working together, one of the other, you try managed care liability. So do different searches. Some questions are going to ask you to find an encyclopedia, an ALR, whatever. So you may find the same thing, that's fine. I understand sometimes, like we found that one ALR article, you may find the same thing. But when I ask you to evaluate, don't give me the exact same evaluation. Make those different. When I ask you to evaluate or ask you why you like something better, familiarity is not a good basis. We're here to learn something new. So tell me why it's good based on its effectiveness in giving you new information, in helping you find those all-important primary sources, and whatever other, because it's got a great table of contents, because it's organized well. Again, familiarity, if you only rely on that, you won't learn anything new all semester. Okay, so just as we do in class, we have our hypothetical with our client. They were trying to figure out HMO liability and learn a little bit about ERISA. So we are going to have a single question to answer on the assignments throughout the semester. There'll be 5 assignments. First one, as you see, talks about secondary sources. So let's do a mini issue spotting so that you all are on the, I don't really care so much about the same page, but you're all going in the right direction because I don't want for you to get confused and misdirected starting out with the assignment. So you have a client who wants to introduce yet another bottled tea product. Not that there's not already enough. But this time, her claim to fame is going to be, it is unsweetened, to appeal to the health and weight conscious market. But she obviously, with all the bazillion bottled teas that are out there, she's going to have to engage in a lot of marketing. And so she plans to highlight, since she's working on the health conscious market, she plans to advertise, because she learned that tea contains polyphenols. This is actually true, I read this, which have found to possibly, it's not scientifically proven, but possibly reduce the risks of cancer and heart disease. But she wants to avoid liability under New York and federal law for false labels or advertising food. So, issue spotting, always good to start with. Who are we talking about? That's relevant. Okay, I'm not going to spend very long. So who? Okay, well, okay. Pardon me? She doesn't have a name. Well, you're not going to research somebody's name, right? All right. No? Okay. Okay, what? What does she want to do? Market T. Okay, where are we? Okay, when? Well, today and future. Okay. Back to the what a second. So what is she trying to do? What is she worried about? What is she visiting you for?
She is worried about potentially making false advertising.
So avoid false advertising. Okay, anything else?
Liability for false advertising.
Avoid. My exclamation, liability. Anything else she worried about? Labeling. So anybody have any legal theories? We kind of did a little bit. Liability. False advertising. Label. So question for you. Or does anybody have anything to add?
Did we go over unfair trade practices?
Oh, that's a possible legal theory. Unfair trade practice. What makes you think of that?
Typically you publicly state something about a potential competitor, someone who's a legal competitor in your market, then you can get damages for unfair trade practices. If they can show that they've lost clientele because of it.
Okay. Anything else? So, question for you. Our client is thinking about producing or plans to produce tea, which is food or drink, or a product. Is this a product liability question?
More of an advertising liability.
So we have false advertising, libel, false advertising. So is that a yes or a no?
Well, I mean, it doesn't seem like she's going to have any problem with the underlying product, which is the tea. That seems more of like the packaging.
So packaging label. So I'm going to ask again, is that a yes, she has to worry about product liability, or no?
Yes.
Yes, she does.
I'll say no.
I'll say no. How many say yes? Law by democracy. How many say no? And I've got a whole lot of people who aren't voting. So question for you. So product liability, what is it?
Manufacturing, defects of manufacturing.
So defects of manufacturing for a product, right? For an existing product. Sean?
Do we have to look into like possible trademark violations or things along those lines?
to find that out. Let's possibly.
As far as the product liability, I guess you have to be conscious of that in case she actually does put sugar in her tea, and in the event that she gets to somebody who has sugar for some reason. I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of with product liability, as opposed to it just being a late. I think it's a labeling issue with product liability. It's kind of hard to see how that would come into it. Is that something that you would have to look into with like FDA regulations, whether food would be a product liability issue, or is it some other type of issue? Or is tea food and under the FDA?
Well, that's something you'll have to figure out. Where I'm going is in terms of product liability. You'll want to, how do I put this? So where I'm going is there are possible scenarios, as Katrina pointed out. You'll have to think about where it might fall under with regard to relevant agencies or unfair trade practices, but as a product, if you remember your cases from torts, all your product liability cases involved products, people who used products. We don't have one yet, right? She wants one, and it may be at some point down the line if something goes wrong, but that's going to be another issue. She wants to get her product off the ground and get people to buy it. So where I'm trying to get you to think about is don't get any good lawyer can send you in 18 different directions. You need to figure out which is the most important direction to start in. It may be you have to go into the other 10 or 12 or 18, but start in the most likely direction, which is why you do the issue spotting. So where are we going to start? You have to find the questions I'll go over in a second. I'm going to ask you to look in encyclopedias and look in ALRs. So what are going to be some of your search terms? You all can have different search terms. There are no right answers here. Okay? Anything else?
Deceptive labeling.
Okay. Yeah. Trade practices. Okay. So in terms of, where'd my copy go? There it went. So that's our issue spotting. Answering the questions. So in part A, I ask you to look in encyclopedias. So I ask you to look in one national encyclopedia. You get to choose. So choose between ALR, AMJR, or CJS. Totally up to you. And then I also ask you to, and look in New York. So basically, you don't really have a choice there. It's New York JUR. You get to choose Lexis or Westlaw. So you're finding one national encyclopedia and New York JUR in either Lexis or Westlaw, and you're going to answer questions 1 through 8. In question 4, you will notice I say, describe the steps you took, include how you found the encyclopedia and any pre- or post-search filters. By that, I mean very simply, when you start on either Lexis or Westlaw, do you narrow first to secondary materials, or do you throw in your search and then narrow after? Those are pre-search filter would be narrowing before your search, post-search filter would be narrowing after. Just tell me what you did. Notice in question 8, there's a part A and a part B. Answer all the parts. If you don't answer the parts, I can't find a way to give you credit for that part. If you answer it even if it's wrong, I can give you some credit. Okay, so 8 questions for part A. Part B, ask you to look on the web. You will notice some questions have word limits. Please stick to those word limits just for those particular questions. Those tend to be the evaluation questions. I want you to think about what you're saying and not just throw in everything in the kitchen sink. The word limits are fairly generous, quite generous. So most of the time, most people don't have any problem keeping to them. In fact, they usually, most people don't have any problem. Okay, part C, I ask you to look at law reviews, what we did today. Question 5, I ask you to look at the index to legal periodicals, which we just did a workshop on. Remember, that's not on Lexis and Westlaw. I get sometimes answers people forget after a week or so. If you have trouble finding ILP, it's totally fine to ask the reference librarian at the desk or me. Come to think of it, for any of these questions, it's totally fine to ask. Make sure on question 5 you answer all 5 A through E. Again, same idea. Question 6 is a little, part D is a little funky. It's where we look at treatises. So I list 6 different places where you can find treatises. So the library catalog we looked at, IntelliConnect Cheetah, that is just off of the library homepage. CCH IntelliConnect. It's now called Cheetah, so you might see it referenced both ways, so that's why I put that in there. You all know Lexis, Westlaw, Bloomberg, and of course Google Books, so I want you to look for treatises in those 6 places. And then for each of 1 through 6, list the title of what you find. And then from that list, pick the best one out of the 5 that are in Google Books. And the reason for that is because Google Books, a lot of times you won't have access to the full text because of copyright issues. So pick whatever the best is from 1 through 5 and then answer in question 2, A through E. Question E, you're looking at BNA and legal news. We did that last time. If you have trouble finding, BNA is on Bloomberg Law. If you have trouble finding New York Law Journal, which is under question 2, which is on Lexis, again, don't hesitate to ask. And then question F is an evaluation. So a quick review. This is not, emphasis not, supposed to be an exercise in frustration. This is not a scavenger hunt. This is to give you experience. Remember my whole thing about this is a skills class and tennis and all that? This is to give you practice. As I said, first class, students have told me they do a large part of their learning on the exercise, on the assignments. Totally fine to ask me questions. In fact, I encourage it. You get class participation credit for it. Email, find me in the office, find me at the reference desk, whatever works for you. Questions are good. Okay? Any questions? Keep with the theme? All right. So we have 45 minutes. We're going to head down to the library to finish the treatises exercise. You should have already found a title of a treatise from the library website, the research guides. If not, bring your laptop down and I'll help you with that. In fact, you should pack up and bring your stuff down because we're finishing up downstairs and there's another class in here. So in case we go over, you won't have to worry about it.